One of the great privileges of working at History Hit and making films together with our team at Timeline is the access we get to extraordinary historical locations. Like this one, Stonehenge. I'm right in the middle of the stone circle now. It is an absolutely extraordinary place to visit. If you want to watch the documentary like the one we're producing here, go to History Hit TV. It's like Netflix for history. And if you use the code Timeline when you check out, you'll get a special introductory offer. See you there.
Important years in the Australian War Memorial's history, I'll go behind the scenes to learn how the Great War shaped a young nation and reveal the powerful stories behind the names on the Roll of Honour. In this episode, the Battle of Lone Pine.
Is it fair to say that what happened here was as bad as anything that happened on this peninsula?
Australians used it thereafter as a measure of how bad something was.
Following in the footsteps of a Great War hero.
He'd have a bag full of these, and then he'd be tossing them like a cricket ball.
So you don't throw it like a stone?
No, yeah.
It's a big lob.
You lob them.
The man in the hot seat.
If we don't get this right, pretty much every household in Australia is going to know my name, and for all the wrong reasons.
Work on the new $32 million First World War gallery begins.
I mean, how do you do this with a lot of bits of rusty metal?
To be perfectly honest with you at this moment, I have no idea.
And the act of remembrance continues.
It's just so amazing. I can't believe I'm actually holding the actual medals of my great-great-grandfather.
Hi there. I'm good. Signing in? Sure thing.
It's early hours at the Australian War Memorial, and I've been granted special access before the doors open to the public to visit one of the memorial's most sacred exhibition galleries.
This is the Hall of Valor in the Australian War Memorial. It's home to one of the largest collections of Victoria Crosses in the world. Every year, thousands of visitors come here to read stories of Australian soldiers and airmen who've been recipients of the award since the turn of the last century. Each man displayed exceptional human qualities, extreme bravery, self-sacrifice. The VC is still being awarded, and we still honour men like these. It seems certain that some of us always will.
The Hall of Valor features the soldiers who came forward in the hour of need and when others were looking for someone to lead and inspire them. The Victoria Cross is the highest award for extraordinary acts performed in the face of the enemy in wartime. From the Boer War to Afghanistan, 100 Australians have been awarded the Victoria Cross. 70 of those VC medals are displayed in the memorial.
You know, I'm one of many that do amazing things on a battlefield. I was fortunate, I guess, enough to be singled out for what I did. There's many others who weren't. There's many others who didn't even get to come back from what they had achieved. and they did it regardless.
There's something so special about the Victoria Cross, its proud history, the traditions that surround it. I love the stories of the VCs. I remember as a little girl growing up the way my parents spoke in hushed tones of the VC. There's a reverence attached to it in its history.
The Hall of Valor is full of stories of courageous men. But there is one soldier in particular whose story reads like a fable. But in fact, it's true. His name is Captain Alfred Shout. During the 5 months he fought in Gallipoli, Alfred Shout was awarded the Military Cross, a mention in dispatches, and finally the Victoria Cross, making him Australia's most decorated soldier of the Gallipoli campaign.
Why is Captain Shout a standout amongst all of these standout men?
He had a personality that just draws you, even 100 years, almost 100 years down the track, even at that distance. It's a personality that's almost infectious. He was always laughing. He was game for anything. There's a private from the 2nd Battalion that says the first time that he saw Alfred Shout, they were bunkered down. The Turks were just shooting. The grass was exploding and the bushes were exploding. And he looked around, he said, I was scared. Every second man was dead. They said if they gave the order to get back to the beach, I would have been the winner. And as he looked up, this officer strolled along the top of the ridge with a walking stick and a revolver, and it was Shout. He was almost legendary before he even was in the attack of Lone Pine.
100 years ago, these men fought side by side in the infamous Battle of Lone Pine. Lone Pine has gone down in military history as one of the most brutal ever fought by Australians in any war.
Men knew as they went over Lone Pine that they were facing almost certain death. And they did it with courage. Now, in one sense, it's almost impossible to overstate or exaggerate the contribution and the sacrifice that these men made.
Of the 9 Victoria Crosses awarded to Australian soldiers during the Gallipoli campaign, 7 were for outstanding actions of bravery at Lone Pine. The soldiers of Lone Pine emerge as a unique band of brothers. For the survivors, well, they'd been to hell and returned as legends. The names of the Victoria Cross recipients will be forever etched in history. They are Lieutenant William Simons, Corporal Alexander Burton, Lance Corporal Leonard Kaiser.
That is not the face of a hero. He certainly is a hero, but it's not the face of one. Leonard himself later on in life said that it's the only adventure he ever had. I'm just a garden variety clock tinkerer.
Corporal William Dunstan, Private John Hamilton, Lieutenant Frederick Tubb, and the man known as the Laughing Cavalier, the charismatic Captain Alfred Shout.
How much did it matter to get hold of Captain Shout's VC? What was the process of obtaining that artefact?
It was the gap in our collection. We had 8 of the 9, and this fabled last Lone Pine VC, for years and years, we didn't know where it was. 2006, it popped up at an auction, and then Kerry Stokes, who's been a great benefactor of the Australian War Memorial and other institutions, went to the auction and bought it and presented it straight to the Australian War Memorial after that. So,
how much did he have to pay to obtain it?
I believe it was 1.2 million. That's with the buyer's premium, as I understand it.
Wow.
And you know, all Australians should thank him. And they asked him, and all he said was, "It's what any Australian would do." I think sometimes...
If you had 1.2 million to spend...
Following in the footsteps of Alfred Shout is Afghanistan war hero Ben Robert Smith, who acknowledges that there is a burden of responsibility that comes with being awarded a Victoria Cross.
A phrase that's probably not one I like too much is poster boy for defence, and you see me put on a pedestal, which in some ways I understand and think is a good thing, but what that means is that you now have to live your life in that manner.
Ben not only donated his VC to the memorial, but also his combat uniform.
I donated my award to the War Memorial because I believe that all Australians, particularly the younger generation, should be entitled to see it. I'd much rather see it here than in my soft drawer.
Standing at an imposing 200 centimetres in height, Ben is Australia's most recognisable VC recipient. In the last few months, the memorial's curators have been busy making a super-sized, custom-made mannequin large enough to display the combat uniform that Ben Robert Smith wore during the action in which he was awarded the Victoria Cross.
It's life-size exactly to Ben Robert Smith's measurements. So it was a matter of spending quite a bit of time to make sure he looks like he does in real life. We had to get lots of measurements and create or sculpt the mannequin from flat planks of ether foam.
It was pretty surreal, my first conversation with him, because I had to ask him his measurements. It's not every day you ask a Victoria Cross recipient, how big are you? So we're going to unwrap this upstairs?
Yep, we'll unwrap it upstairs, so we'll take it up on this trolley.
Yeah.
It does feel a lot like air sometimes.
The patient's doing well. This side?
Yeah, under the medals, I think, rather than the picture.
Now that the job is complete, the curators are expecting a visit from a special guest who is keen to inspect their work.
Hey guys, how you going?
Hey, how you doing?
Ben, how you going?
Hi.
Craig, how are you, Ben?
Nice to meet you, Craig.
Well, here it is.
Great job.
Yeah.
How did you make the mannequin?
Oh, well, that's a long and tedious process.
Did you make it?
I did.
How did you reach the top bit?
But it's a big challenge to do something like that when obviously you're here, you're around, whereas a lot of the other mannequins we have on display they represent people, not just one person. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of give and take with that, whereas this is a lot more, it's important to get it right. Yeah.
No, it looks great, guys. Well done.
Thank you.
Very impressive. One of the things that rings true to me is that you never fly in a battle alone. And so when I see that uniform, it makes me think about the guys that I served with, about the effort they put in, about what they personally did, and some of them not to get recognised, and also my mates who have been wounded from that tour, and what they then had to go through. So there's a lot more to it than just one day.
In the face of danger, Ben Robert Smith survived, but Gallipoli war hero Captain Alfred Shout wasn't so fortunate. On the memorial's roll of honour, all men are equal in death. There is no special mention of Captain Alfred Shout's courageous deeds. To truly understand the calibre of the man Alfred Shout was, I need to understand the Battle of Lone Pine. My journey would take me to Gallipoli, and eventually I would discover a bond that transcends time.
I feel as if I have a connection between he and I think he watches over me. I feel just absolutely privileged to be the great-great-granddaughter of Alfred Shout.
At the Australian War Memorial, I've been researching the story of Victoria Cross recipient Captain Alfred Shout, who was one of the Great War's most flamboyant and memorable heroes. Known as the Laughing Cavalier, he was also the most decorated soldier of the Gallipoli campaign. Whether feeding a pet rabbit before striding out to battle, or relaxing with his fellow soldiers, Alfred Shout always stood out from the crowd. a man at ease with himself, with an almost mythical reputation. Photography curator Kate Dethridge is also a big fan of Captain Alfred Shout.
His skin is completely void of lines. He is very smartly dressed.
Do you think he was vain, that he saw himself as a bit of a Jack the Lad?
I think he's gorgeous. We see in other photographs of him from before this period, he has very dapper clothing, he has fantastic moustache, and even here his uniform has been brushed and clean, his boots are polished, and he's fixed his chin strap up until his hat in a very particular style for himself. He's saying, I am an individual. We have another photograph in our collection, and on the back of the original photograph, it just says Whisper. And curators for a long time have suspected that his nickname at Gallipoli was Whisper. Whisper and shout. It's those little things, suddenly knowing a nickname amongst mates, that makes a huge difference to the overall story.
Yeah, because I think it's probably at least as important, as well as remembering him as a VC, it's also important to remember him as a man.
Absolutely.
And as a friend and a comrade.
Yes.
And just a guy.
He's been put up on a pedestal, and then suddenly you find out that the blokes were calling him Whisper.
Alfred Shout was survived by his wife, Rose, and their daughter, Florence. Mother and daughter are pictured here, 46 years after Alfred's death. For the Shout family, the personal impact of his death has reverberated throughout the generations. "11-year-old Mia Thomas has grown up with the legend of her great-great-grandfather.
Ever since I've known about him and about the war, I've just been so interested, and I would just do anything for him if he was still here, which really he is. He's in my heart. I get this photo pretty much to put on there because I like to look at him, and because I'm so interested in him and I'm proud of him, I just take a minute to look at him and think about him and just what he went through and things like that. And I think about him before I go to bed and things like that, just to look at him. And sometimes I speak to him. That might be a little bit weird, but I just speak to him if I have a problem and just say, I'm proud of you and I hope that you're proud of me, and things like that as well. This is a photo of me when I did my second march, and that's my dad, and it's really funny because he looks a lot like my great-great-grandfather Shout, so that's pretty amusing actually. And this is a newspaper article of my pop. It says, "Brave Captain was a true blue hero," and it says what my great-great-grandfather did for his country. When I talk to my great-great-grandfather, I just say I'm very proud of you, and you're going to be remembered by so many people, and your family is so proud of you, and we all miss you very much.
The journey to understand what Captain Shout endured would take me beyond the shores of Anzac Cove, with the memorial's head historian Ashley Eakins as my guide.
So it's fair to say that from day one, Alfred Shout emerges as a heroic figure.
Absolutely, and he is also a character. He's renowned for his cheerfulness, his humour. He's a man who's led troops before, and I've brought you here to show you where Alf Shout excelled as a leader from the very first day. This is Shrapnel Valley running up here, became the lifeline to the front line, up there to Queen's Post, the furthest inland.
Yeah. Amid heavy fighting on Gallipoli's formidable ridges, Alfred Shout led his troops through brave example.
Alf Shout, on the first morning of the landing, with his 1st Battalion coming in the 2nd, 3rd wave, he and his men were pinned down under heavy enemy fire. He took them forward and found a better firing position for them.
Right.
Quite outstanding, and just invigorated all the men, revived the fighting spirit, and got them back into the action.
I suppose it must do something profound for men when they see someone else with casual disregard for their own safety.
Exemplary behaviour, of course, it's what killed officers too. On 2 days after the landing, Alf Shout again is up on Russell's Top and he rallies a large group of men and leads a bayonet charge. For that, he's decorated with the Military Cross and for these other actions. A little later than that, he's wounded, of course, and so Alf Shout's story is one of exemplary leadership. He's evacuated to a hospital ship where he's treated, and he doesn't want to go. He actually wants to be with his men.
These remarkable photographs show the injured Alfred Shout recovering from his battle wounds. Sitting on the deck of a hospital ship with his arm in a sling, Shout had miraculously survived a bullet that passed through his arm and into his chest. Back home in Australia, Alfred Shout's great-great-granddaughter, Mia Thomas, has studied the historic accounts of Shout's momentous first battle in Gallipoli.
Lieutenant Shout was a hero. Wounded himself several times, he kept picking up wounded men and carrying them out of the firing line. I saw him carry fully a dozen men away. Then another bullet struck him in the arm and it fell useless by his side. Still, he would not go to the rear. "I'm here with you boys to the finish," was the only reply he would make.
3 months after this photograph was taken, the invincible Shout would face his biggest challenge yet, the Battle of Lone Pine. This is the Lone Pine Cemetery and Memorial. It's a place of heartbreaking beauty and serenity, so that it's almost impossible to imagine, to believe, that this was the scene of some of the most horrific fighting experienced by Australian soldiers on the Gallipoli Peninsula, the Battle of Lone Pine. It was one of the set pieces known collectively as the August Offensive. It was an attempt finally to break out of the stalemate that had persisted here since the day the Australians arrived. What unfolded here was 3 days and 4 nights of the most terrifying, appalling slaughter. It involved guns and knives, bullets and bayonets, bare hands and teeth. Some scenes impossible to imagine. The Lone Pine Cemetery is located on the Gallipoli Plateau. It was once a bloody battlefield, honeycombed with trenches and tunnels. Is it fair to say that what happened here and what happened in those underground trenches and tunnels was as bad as anything that happened on this peninsula?
Australians used it thereafter as a measure of how bad something was. They would actually say, was it as bad as Lone Pine? Because men never forgot these terrible battles here underground. The squalor and congestion in those trenches down there was such that the bodies piled 4 and 5 high. Men were found in groups that had bayoneted each other. Sometimes 3 or 4 at a time had run the bayonets through each other. The bodies couldn't be disposed of because of the covered trenches. In the places where they were a little open, they were able to hurl the bodies onto the parapet. But in many places, they simply had to fight over the body, stepping on the body. It was carnage on a scale the Australians had never experienced.
On the eve of battle, Captain Alfred Shout commented to a friend, "We'll make a name for ourselves tonight."
But Alf is leading a team of men on the 9th up this trench, trying with rifle fire. He's a crack shot, he's a marksman, and a great leader of men, a natural leader of men. He and another officer, Captain Sass, fight their way up these trench systems, driving the Turks back, building barricades. He's bombing and shooting with his rifle at the same time. Well, Alf is, of course, involved in these continual counterattacks, repelling them. The Turks are throwing men back in continually, trying to retake the positions, and Alf is fighting back to recover parts of trenches, just sections of trenches, with his groups of men and another officer, Captain Sass. The pair of them are using rifle and bombs. They're fighting their way up the trenches, driving the Turks back. At one stage, to try and get supremacy, he lights 3 of these bombs at once.
Captain Alfred Shout was a master bomb thrower. His final hours have been immortalised by war artists as a glorious fight against the odds. In death, he would be awarded the Victoria Cross. The memorial's curator, Gary Oakley, has researched the details of Shout's last stand. He believes Alfred Shout took on the Turks by throwing a constant volley of ball grenades.
So what's the action to make that thing go pop?
Well, basically it'd have a piece of fuse coming out of it, and it would have a thing like what calls a Brock or a Noble igniter on the top. You took a little cap off, and it really was like a match head.
Oh, so it's something sticking out that's got a flammable bit on the end?
Yeah. And he would probably have a brassard on his arm, and the brassard is basically like the side of a matchbox.
All right.
And he'd have a bag full of these, and what he would be doing is he'd be striking them on his arm, and they're timed, so he'd know that he's got 5 seconds or whatever, and then he'd be tossing them like a cricket ball.
So you don't throw it like a stone?
No, yeah.
It's a big lob?
You lob them. You toss them like a cricket ball. The problem, what happened to Shout was he lit 3 at once. You know, I mean...
Why did he do that?
Well, he knew. The other captain that's with him, who's actually a rifleman, he's shooting, trying to clear the trench. Shout's throwing grenades, exploding. They're moving forward. They're clearing the trench. The other man with the rifle's probably got a bayonet on. This works into later on into bombing, where you have a bayonetman who actually advance after you've dropped your grenades. Their job is to kill all those who are either wounded or fallen, knocked down by the grenade, so that they give you a safe place then for you to step into to start throwing your grenades, and that's how you work down the trench. What I think happened with Shout is he went light.
How can he hold 3 of those? I mean,
he probably couldn't. He might have put them in his pocket, or he might have been at the corner of a bay, because the trenches are not straight. They have bays in them. He knew the enemy was on the other side. He probably went, drop, light. Third one, when he went to throw it, he got it up to about here, and it exploded in his hand. Took his eye out.
So it might have been as simple as the third one was in a pocket and he couldn't get it out?
Yeah, that's right. It could have been the possibility he had it in his pocket, or he dropped it, or, you know, and the delay caused him to explode.
He refuses to leave. He says to the troops, "I'll rally you on, boys." He's still calling them on. He even says he'll come back as they take him away down to the medical treatment centres. He's evacuated to a hospital ship, and he dies 2 days later from these serious wounds.
A little later, Lieutenant Shout was wounded again and fell down. It was cruel to see him. He struggled and struggled until he got to his feet, refusing all entreaties to go to the rear. Then he staggered and fell and tried to rise again. At last, some men seized him and carried him away, still protesting.
This is, of course, the wall that commemorates the missing on Gallipoli, the Australian missing. Over 4,200 of them. Nearly 1,000 of them were buried at sea. So not only did they have no known grave on land, these are men who died on hospital ships and were committed, of course, to the deep. And you see he's marked there with the VC he never would have known that he'd earned.
Alfred Shout almost sounds like a mythical figure from a legend. But in order properly to remember him, we need to turn him back into flesh and blood. And I think that's best done by meeting his descendants. My next step towards understanding the legacy of one of Australia's greatest war heroes would be to meet his great-great-granddaughter.
This day will just be one of my best childhood memories, I think.
From the Australian War Memorial's research archives to walking the Lone Pine battlefields, I've been following the story of Victoria Cross hero Captain Alfred Shout. The Victoria Cross is the ultimate medal for valour for the fighting soldier. The one that was awarded to Captain Alfred Shout, the Lone Pine hero, was the last privately owned Gallipoli Victoria Cross. Media mogul Kerry Stokes paid a record-breaking $1.2 million to buy the medal from the family, and he then donated it to the Australian War Memorial to save it for the nation. Now, until the time of the sale, next to nothing was known about the Shout family, so I want to meet them to see if they still remember Captain Shout and if they feel connected to him.
I think he was very brave. I think a lot of people know that. And I'm sure that he was a really nice person, great friend, great mate, great husband, great dad. And when he went to war, he would have been just a great leader, a great captain. The sad thing is that he had his last days in Gallipoli and died at the age of 33, which is really young.
I think he was very outspoken. I think he was a villain, had a gay sort of heart. He liked to be a leader, which I think he proved. And generally, I think he was a pretty down-to-earth sort of fellow. I think there was nothing else. He wasn't shy, that's for sure.
It was in 2009, due to the exorbitant cost of insuring the VC medal, that Mia's grandfather, Graham Thomas, reluctantly decided to part with Shout's medal set.
We had the medals at home for many years. Previous to that, it was my nan's house, which they were not hidden, but they were in a bureau, a desk. So you couldn't bring them out because people got to know and they'd break in and take them for sure.
Initially, when the decision was made to sell the medals, I was devastated. I played with them as a child, and the value in them to me wasn't a monetary value but a sentimental value, so I think you can't put a price on that. And I guess in some ways I would have liked to have passed them on to Mia, but the way in which it came about, and Kerry Stokes purchased them, and they went to the War Memorial, and I believe they were the only original set that wasn't within the VC niche at the War Memorial, and I do believe, in hindsight, that they are in the best place.
Although Mia proudly wears a replica of her great-great-grandfather's medal set every Anzac Day, she's never had the opportunity to see and touch the original Victoria Cross that her own father once played with.
I'm happy that they're in the War Memorial because they're there for people to see and people to learn about what he did, and I've still got these medals here which I'm just over the moon to have and to wear. I wish that I could see them, the real medals that Dad obviously grew up with in his childhood and that passed down to him, and I wish that I could have them personally, but I'm just happy that other people can see them and learn about him as well as I can and wear these medals. These are just, I'm very proud and honoured to wear them.
In a fortnight's time we're going down to the War Memorial, and they're going to open up the VC niche, and you'll actually be able to hold the original VC medal and all the medals. And so you do get to touch the real deal and experience that. You can't take them home, you have to leave them there.
You can't take them home. But you can tell they're originals, so underneath on the bottom of all the medals, they're all marked AJ Shout, AJ Shout.
Oh, that will be amazing. I'll always remember that day. I will.
No.
Well, it'll be good.
Certainly something to look forward to, isn't it? Yeah? We'll all go down there with bells on.
Meanwhile, as we wait for Mia's visit, work continues on the memorial's redevelopment of the new First World War galleries in time for the commemoration of Australia's centenary of the Great War.
Splendid, thank you.
project manager, Paul van der Plaat, has the massive job of overseeing the $32 million building works.
Does it lend a different atmosphere to your job and to the work of the team that you are in Australia's War Memorial and it is such a sensitive place?
We've actually got people that have fallen over backwards to come and work on this project, given the nature of the project, the heritage, and you know, supposedly the shrine.
Right, so it's the hot ticket.
Yeah, it's very important for them to work on. And even the subbies, a lot of the subcontractors working too. You know, their father or grandfather had fought in the war, and they feel a bit of pride working on a project like this. So, look, you don't do it every day.
The clock is ticking as the builders race to complete the redevelopment on time and on budget.
Well, I've told the public that we're on schedule and we're at this stage under budget, so let's keep going.
Yes, we are indeed.
If we don't get this right, pretty much every household in Australia is going to know my name, and for all the wrong reasons.
In the small French village of Boulecourt, the memorial's director, Brendan Nelson, has unearthed an important acquisition for the memorial's new First World War gallery.
You just have to drive into the town or walk into the town and you suddenly realise the importance of it. You've got the cafe on the corner, Le Canberra. You've got a town which does not ever forget Australian sacrifice. 10,300 Australians were casualties over a 6-week period with 2 battles, very important battles in May and April in 1917.
The story of Boulecourt is also the story of Australia's introduction to tank warfare. During the First Battle of Boulecourt in April 1917, tanks had been ordered to accompany the 4th Australian Division. Unfortunately, the Australians had never operated or even trained with tanks before, and the tanks were unreliable, underpowered and poorly armoured. Eventually, most became targets for the German artillery and machine gunners and could be seen standing crippled or burning on the battlefield. Over several decades, local Boulecourt farmers have collected an extraordinary array of artefacts that once lay in the old battlefield surrounding the village. And it's here, on this farm, that Brendan Nelson has hit the jackpot.
So let me introduce to you Alain Jacques.
Alain, Brendan.
Enchanté, monsieur.
Enchanté. Wonderful to meet you, and thank you so much for welcoming me, apart from everything else you do for Australia. So it's hard to believe that under this are the parts of a tank.
We hope that it is still under.
It's obviously a high-tech security system. So we've obviously got some of the wheels.
The wheels?
Yes.
Part of the armor here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is wonderful. We're definitely going to use these components. To think that you could find these relics from a First World War tank under a piece of plastic in a farm shed in a small but extremely important village in France is just beyond belief. And the British are not aware that you have this?
It is not the problem.
we want to get it before they find out we're getting it.
You know.
So the way we propose to exhibit what we've got here is this. We're going to underlight the whole thing, which should be very effective, and we've got some specialist engineers at the moment working on how to mount these components, which are obviously quite heavy, to illustrate within the exhibition the story and the role of the tank, both in protection and in offensive operations. I think it'll be very effective, the way it's going to be done.
Finally, after much anticipation, the Boulecourt tank parts arrive at the memorial, where they are inspected by quarantine officers.
As you can see, we've just received a delivery of the Bullecourt tank parts. We only get to open them up once the quarantine team is here with our conservators. They'll check the condition of it at that stage and go from there. There's 40 assorted tank parts in here. They'll be vacuum cleaning them and determining whether it's clean enough to actually be declared as being safe in our collection.
We've found a few creepy crawlers. We've had a spider so far. We've had a few of these other mould-feeding insects, but a lot of them are associated with the actual wood, the pallets.
Yeah. As the months roll by, the building works and renovation ramp up.
So Brendan, this is where the Bullecourt diorama will end up, on this side of the room.
Yep.
And then over this way, in the centre, just in front of it, is where we plan to put those tank parts.
I'm thinking of gearboxes and engines, but I'm also thinking of these men inside it.
Well, the tank itself.
But how on earth will the Bullecourt tank parts tell a coherent story of war? Well, that job is in the hands of award-winning commercial designer Brian Cunningham.
We're really just trying to create the lighting so that it would suggest a more reverential atmosphere. We'll display it in a way that's not like a pristine tank, but these are the remnants of this tank, and it's a silent witness to the experience of war. So I think, in a way, it'll be quite a moving piece, and it's right in the centre of the gallery.
Gary, I don't understand what this bit here does with that.
Brian Cunningham has the challenging job of transforming the tank parts into Brendan Nelson's vision.
So how are you going to make it look pretty, like a tank? Make it look wonderful? I mean, how do you do this with a lot of bits of rusty metal? How's it going to...
To be perfectly honest with you at this moment, I have no idea. I think once you get the light up through it, it'll look quite interesting. Otherwise, it just looks like a boring bit of crappy metal. Edit that. If you can get that balance right, you need to let the object do the talking. My common expression is it's the beef and not the bun that's important here. Hopefully, it will we'll come up with something that will make it look like an exploded tank that's had a life in the war.
While it's hard to imagine how the final gallery will look when it's completed, without a doubt, the work along the way has been done with immense care in honour of the Great War soldiers whose stories the gallery will represent.
I mean, I do get quite involved with it because my grandfather was on the First World War, and you sort of sketch this stuff and you think, I wonder, maybe he was in this tank. The connections to family through all of this stuff is fascinating, I think. You think about the men, what happened to the bodies in this one, it's kind of shocking in a way. So it's broken, this piece of well-engineered or not so well-engineered machinery is all broken up, and so were all the men. And even if they did survive, it still broke them.
The Australian War Memorials team are preparing for the arrival of Mia Thomas, the 11-year-old great-great-granddaughter of Victoria Cross recipient Captain Alfred Shout. The courageous Captain Shout was Australia's most decorated soldier of the Gallipoli campaign and earned his Victoria Cross after the horrific Battle of Lone Pine.
How unusual is it for the VCs to get some fresh air?
Very unusual.
Have you seen it several times? Or?
I've seen it once before where they've actually left the memorial, and that was an extraordinarily special case where the Gallipoli 9 were taken on tour around Australia when this area was redeveloped, and that was just so the collection could still be accessible to Australians while we're undergoing this complete redevelopment.
And also, how unusual is it to have direct descendants of a VC recipient in the room.
This is something out of the box. It's something I rarely get to do. This is the closest I will ever get to actually meeting Alfred, and we're talking about 3 generations almost all the way back. So this is pretty exciting for me, yeah. Absolutely. Good morning.
Hello,
Hello, how are you going?
Hello. Hi, I'm Craig Blanche. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial.
Hello.
Greg?
Mia?
Graham, I believe we may have spoken in the past. We have.
Hello, sir. I'm Neil. How are you doing?
His great-great-granddad.
Wow.
So you'd be familiar with that medal group. That's the replica you would have worn on the Anzac Day March. Now, Mia, we need to put on gloves. Your great-great-grandfather's medal group is now part of the National Collection, and as such owned by all Australians, and in another 4 generations' time, we want them to look just as they are there now. And the acids on the skin will, over time, damage the medals. Yep, you can fill. So we might just step into the other room. There's a bit more room there. Would you like to hold them?
Yes, please. I'm speechless. I can't believe I'm actually holding the actual medals of my great-great-grandfather.
It is a sight you will rarely see here. The Victoria Crosses come off on only under the most extraordinary circumstances, and this is one of those, which is great.
What do you think about when you think of your great-great-grandfather? What do you see?
I just see him. I can just see him wearing these. Like, it's just so amazing that the Victoria Cross, this was my great-great-grandfather's. Like, this was in my family. It's just amazing.
Because it'd be quite something if he could have known that in 100 years' time, his great-great-granddaughter was going to be standing, holding these medals.
Yeah.
If he'd known that his line was going to go on in that way, what that would have meant to him, to know that you'd be here today.
I think he does know.
Now, how many times do you get told that you are the spitting image of Captain Alfred Shout?
I think it's the moustache, Neil.
I think it's hilarious. it's the same face.
Yeah, me was the first one that pointed it out.
Really? Did you see this, the looky-likey as well?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. Yeah. What do you think about this place when you visit it?
I think it's absolutely amazing just to see the amount of poppies and all the soldiers that went to war, that fought for their country and their people.
Obviously lived a long time ago, even for me, never mind for you. When you think about him and what sort of person he was, what ideas do you have about him?
I think he was just an ordinary man who went to war, but I think the very special thing about him is that he went back to war and he died as a proud man. Like, he could have gone back home. He could have done so many things. Like, he could have still lived with his wife. He could have seen his daughter get married and have children. And he could have seen so many things, and it still lives on.
Hear, hear.
Every evening, the memorial holds a last post ceremony, and tonight it will be held in honour of the courageous Captain Shout.
I'll just be thinking, wow, this is your moment to shine like what you did, what you died for. This is when everyone's going to remember you and know your story.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Captain Alfred John Shout, VC-MC. Shout was born on the 8th of August 1882 to John and Agnes Shout. He was the eldest of 9 children and the only boy. Shout was prominent in several attacks during the Battle of Lone Pine. In the afternoon of the 9th of August, after leading attacks all morning, Shout led a small party of men down a length of trench held by the Turks, forcing them to retreat. In the last rush, he lit 3 bombs. He managed to throw 2, but the third exploded prematurely, blowing off a hand and wounding him in the face and body. He was still cheerful and encouraging his men as he was being taken away from the front line.
Nearly 100 years have passed since the Battle of Lone Pine ended in the deaths of more than 2,000 men.
Lest we forget.
The battle may be from another time and another place, but through the eyes of Mia, it doesn't seem so long ago.
I am so happy that I got to hold those medals. Dad got to hold the medals, Pop got to hold the medals. I just hope that one day when I have children and they can also live on the memory of Alfred Shout, will just keep on going down through the family.